everybody wants to take their seats. All right, we're going to get started. Welcome to meeting number 41 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. A reminder that if you are using your earpiece and it's plugged in, but not on your ear, please do make sure to place it down on the coaster in front of you just to protect the hearing of our interpreters. And pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on September 22nd, 2025, the committee is resuming its study of opportunities, risks, and regulation of AI in Canada's strategic industries. And with us today, we have an esteemed panel of guests. I'd like to welcome you all. First of all, Barry Sookman, Senior Counsel at McCarthy Tétrault, Mission Control Space Services Incorporated, Ewan Reid, Founder and Chief Executive Officer. And of course, Space Canada, Brian Gallant, Chief Executive Officer. Welcome. As you know, you will each have up to 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and then we will proceed to rounds of questioning. So let's start off with Mr. Sookman. The floor is yours for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to appear today. I'm Senior Counsel with the law firm McCarthy Tétrault and a member of its technology, cyber data, and intellectual property groups. I'm also the author of several books, including an 8-volume book on computer, internet, electronic law, and AI law. I've also been an adjunct professor at Osgoode Hall Law School on intellectual property. I've been a technology lawyer for 30 years, and I've negotiated hundreds of agreements. Many of these have been negotiated with the backdrop of laws and regulations, including those related to privacy and data protection, guidance from regulators like OSFI and ADA when it was being proposed. I have seen how laws governing the uses of technologies, including AI, affects the costs, willingness, and timing of their deployment. This is what I want to speak about today. First, new laws to regulate AI technologies will slow down their deployment in Canada. Organizations, both Canadian and foreign, need to assess whether these technologies will comply with Canadian law. Canada is not the most important market for technology companies that would deploy AI in Canada. Many international companies roll out their technologies by selecting jurisdictions with the greatest market potential and ease of meeting regulatory and localization requirements. Having unique Canadian requirements will slow or chill deployment of AI in Canada. Second, the development and deployment of AI systems most frequently involves global supply chain agreements with many parties. When technologies, including AI technologies, are regulated by specific or prospective laws like ADA, the contracting process becomes protracted, sometimes very considerably, and sometimes, and I can tell you from experience, it just grinds to a halt when parties can't agree on allocation of risk, standards, and flow-down terms. This is especially the case when the parties are not Canadian. We need to take this real politic into account when deciding whether and how to regulate AI in Canada, especially given the divergences in approaches internationally. The reality is that disproportionate amount of cutting-edge technology in AI is built in the United States. If our regulatory structure is excessively prescriptive or misaligned with other innovative, intensive jurisdiction of our trading partners, we should expect talent, capital, and product deployment to migrate elsewhere. The result would not be safer AI in Canada. It would simply mean less Canadian participation in AI. My central submission is that decisions as to how AI should be regulated in Canada must recognize the need to foster and not unduly slow down or create impediments to innovation. I have some recommendations for the committee as to what the principles should be, but given I've got 5 minutes, I'm not going to have a chance to get into them. I will say, though, that there are a plethora of laws in the United States, state laws, that would be useful here in Canada as well, and those would not unduly burden AI companies because they have to comply with them in the major market anyway. If you have some questions about that, I'd be glad to go over it. I do want to say that lack of trust in AI because of inadequate regulation and uptake are not generally correlated, as it's sometimes said. Canadian and organizations worldwide have worried about AI reliability, but that has not stopped them from deploying AI. In fact, they've done so increasingly in the absence of specific legislation, including Canada, the UK, and the US. Nor is it true that AI-specific regulation necessarily produces a trust premium that spurs adoption. You can look at the European Union as a perfect example of that. A good example is also in the legal profession related to its use of AI. And if the committee has any questions about that, I'd be glad to tell you about that. Where I do think caution is warranted is in relation to the increasingly autonomous frontier systems that have the potential to create catastrophic risks and critical AI controlling critical infrastructure. And there is legislation in some U.S. states to deal with that. I'm not minimizing the risks of AI, and I'll just, because I'm going to speak about Pope Leo, I'm sure I'll get an extra 30 seconds, Madam Chair. So,
Mr. Sookman, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Would you have to stick a little bit close to the timeline today because we unfortunately were delayed from votes, but I'm confident that one of the esteemed members here will provide a little bit of time to finish, if that's all right with you. Okay. And we'll go to Mr. Reid for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to appear before this committee. I'm Ewan Reid, founder and CEO of Mission Control. Mission Control is a 100% Canadian-owned, 11-year-old startup headquartered here in Ottawa that develops intelligent space systems. We are amongst the world leaders in deploying AI on spacecraft. In 2023, we became the first organization in the world to send a deep learning AI to the moon. Later that year, we deployed AI in a European Space Agency Earth observation satellite. Last year, we launched our Persistence mission, Canada's giant leap for AI in space. Persistence is a year-long demonstration of using deep learning at the edge on the spacecraft itself to downlink actionable insights instead of spending millions to send raw data. Currently, we're under contract with the Canadian Space Agency to develop the technology to use AI on the spacecraft to detect the location and direction of an active wildfire from orbit. We're also a prime contractor on what could be Canada's next flagship space program, the Lunar Utility Vehicle, leading a consortia of companies from across Canada. This rover will have to survive and operate on its own on the moon, requiring vast amount of onboard autonomy. While Mission Control is a leader in AI, it is important for me to stress that the type of physical AI we develop is fundamentally different than what most people think about when they think of AI. Unlike large language models that consume enormous amounts of power and train with data sets as vast as the internet, our deep learning models are specifically designed to operate on the type of very limited computing platforms that can be sent to operate in space. The deep technical problem that my company solves is enabling the use of AI when computing power is limited. I'm not talking about server farms in space. I'm talking about relatively small spacecraft, incredibly far away, or moving incredibly fast. Physics imposes limits on data transmission, constrained bandwidth, and high latency. With spacecraft sensors increasingly designed to generate more and more data, onboard intelligence is key to unlocking the most from space missions. Training data for algorithms in space applications is also very hard to come by. In the case of operating on the moon, we simply don't have tens of thousands of images of the lunar surface to train a model. That's why we built a 4,000 square foot moon yard right here in the nation's capital and captured thousands of images to create our own proprietary data set before we sent AI to the moon. Like Canada's water and minerals, Canadian data is a key national resource that must be protected and stewarded to realize the benefits for Canadians and prevent abuse by bad actors. The world's largest AI chatbot companies are foreign entities, but so are the companies that provide the services and infrastructure that this AI relies on, such as Amazon AWS and NVIDIA. This creates risks for Canadian companies and Canadians when they are forced to rely on foreign entities to provide key services. For example, our company's AI workflow was recently disrupted when OpenAI bought a company key to providing AI training services for our models. Even though our models are trained exclusively in Canada and we maintain ownership of all the training data, we had no say and no recourse when OpenAI shuttered the service we were using. In upcoming regulation and procurement, Canada should preference fully owned Canadian AI solutions and provide tools and support to companies, universities, and individuals to rigorously defend their IP and copyrights against foreign entities, particularly those that use them to train AI models. Here, the Remote Sensing Space Systems Act, used to regulate data generated by space systems that perform Earth observation, may serve as a guide. Incidentally, this act itself is due to be reformed, and the use of AI onboard spacecraft to parse data should be taken into account. Any AI company, but in particular a foreign AI company, should be regulated and required by its regulator to produce training data, training logs, and proof that sensitive Canadian data is maintained on servers in Canada. Canada does world-leading work when we pick specific areas where we want to excel. Examples in space include space robotics and synthetic aperture radar. Rather than trying to replicate successes elsewhere, focusing on physical AI that interacts directly with sensors and robotics, is key to unlocking the benefits of this technology for globally competitive manufacturing, serving remote Arctic communities, and responding to the effects of climate change. Canada's next billion-dollar space exploration mission, the Lunar Utility Vehicle, is an excellent North Star under which to advance these technologies, inspire Canadians, and reap the benefits in terrestrial sectors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reid. With 3 seconds to spare. Well done. Mr. Gallant, you're up for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. C'est un honneur d'être ici avec vous pour discuter de votre étude sur les opportunités, risques et réglementations de l'IA dans les industries stratégiques du Canada. Merci pour l'invitation. Espace Canada représente plus de 100 innovateurs spatiaux canadiens. Collectivement, ces organisations jouent un rôle essentiel dans la préservation de l'environnement et la lutte contre les changements climatiques, dans la réduction de la fracture numérique, dans la capacité de l'humanité à explorer bien au-delà de notre planète, dans la protection de la sécurité et de la souveraineté du Canada, tout en représentant une...
Whilst representing a huge economic opportunity. Testing. Good day, Madam Chair, and thank you again for the invitation to join you, which is greatly appreciated. Very well. So members of our organization do a good deal to protect Canada's security and sovereignty whilst representing a huge economic opportunity. Given all this, and since space systems and solutions are an essential part of Canada's defence strategy, contributing directly or indirectly to virtually all defence operations, space is certainly a strategic industry.
Wisdom is when a person knows what they don't know. I don't know if I know that. So I will be relying heavily on suggestions and comments from members of Space Canada. There are many thoughts for each of the sections established by the framing of your study, and I look forward to sharing those insights with you today. Je commencerai donc la séance par quelques réflexions générales.
So I'll begin the session with a few general remarks.
Like many other countries, we are trying to figure out how to deal with some complex and massively impactful trends, most of which will be made more complicated by the rise of AI. AI can exacerbate the challenges stemming from a changing geopolitical landscape. It can displace workers and place more wealth in the hands of a few. It can create extra pressures on our environment, and it can further divide people through misinformation and disinformation. The work you are doing is important, and I thank you. I submit that Canada's lagging productivity is one of the economic data points we should all collectively be seized with here in Canada, given the strong correlation between the productivity of a country's economy and that country's standard of living. There are a few reasons that explain Canada's productivity challenges. I have a sense that people in this room would have their thoughts on that, and I'll let that debate to you. One of the reasons, however, that is relevant to your study is Canada needs to do a better job at adopting innovative technologies. This, to me, is one of the reasons the responsible adoption of AI will be important to Canada's economy, prosperity, and standard of living moving forward. That said, Space Canada members emphasize that successful adoption of AI will require safeguards, trust, digital modernization, international collaboration, and the right governmental support and intervention. De-risking the adoption of AI is an important role of for the government to play. Space Canada members consistently frame data protection as a broader issue of national sovereignty and stress the need for trusted Canadian AI infrastructure, sovereign data processing, validated Canadian data sets, and stronger safeguards to reduce dependence on foreign-controlled systems and to mitigate risks to Canadian strategic, economic, and security interests. Members agreed that Canada possesses world-class AI research, capacity, talent, and emerging industrial strength, including in the space sector, but continues to struggle with commercialization, scale-up, infrastructure access, and retaining companies, talent, and IP domestically. Members emphasize that Canada's opportunities lies in the enabling widespread industrial adoption, sovereign infrastructure, collaborative ecosystems, workforce readiness, and the growth of globally competitive Canadian AI firms rooted in strategic sectors, space being one of them. Plusieurs membres ont souligné que la réglementation
Members have underscored that regulation should focus more heavily on data governance, infrastructure integrity, transparency, and the interoperability of our work with allied frameworks. Members emphasize the importance of transparency around training data sets, potential compensation mechanisms for creators, protection of Canadian IP and strategic data, and safeguards against unauthorized foreign access to valuable Canadian research, industrial, and government information.
Initiatives such as the Defence Industrial Strategy and Canada's increasing investments in AI research, while some members called for a more coordinated national approach that aligns AI policy with broader industrial, defence, space, productivity, and economic resilience objectives. I look forward to chatting with you about all of these concepts and themes throughout the session.
Thank you, Mr. Gallant. Thank you for the excellent opening remarks from each of you. We'll now go to questioning with Mr. Falk to start us off with 6 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for coming to committee today. I'm sure you're going to contribute to our study here. Mr. Suckman, I would like to begin with you. In the Liberals' last attempt at presenting AI legislation, Bill C-27, you were quite critical. Can you say specifically the items you found most egregious in that legislation?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. So the prior Liberal bill was introduced without consultation, without input from the general public, and it had a structure which had concentrated all the regulatory authority within just one ministry, INDU. It didn't recognize that, in fact, AI is like electricity and microchips and other technologies that are pervasive throughout the economy. And as such, it tried to regulate the technology as opposed to regulating the uses. If you're regulating uses, Health Canada might deal with AI in health, and OSFI might deal with AI in financial institutions. And there may be certain cases where there wasn't one particular department that would have been useful, but that wasn't the approach that they took. They tried to model it on also just an outline of a bill with everything being left to regulation, which in my view had undermined the importance of Parliament making a decision about AI policy. It would have been all in the hands of the people who were promoting regulation, which in my view was not the appropriate model. I had looked to the UK at the time, which had a decentralized model with a centralized coordination structure, which I think was a much, much better model for AI legislation. And it created uncertainty because nobody knew what exactly was going to be regulated.
You've said back, I believe it was in 2024, that the wisest choice for Canada would be to take a wait-and-see approach and to look at some of the the countries that are more leaders in this field, like United States and the UK. For your observations in the last year or even maybe 6 months, which jurisdictions do you think are at the top of the game?
So it all depends on what you mean by the top of the game, and it also depends on what the priorities are with respect to national policy. The U.S. federally has a policy of hands-off, and that's because they're extremely concerned about their geopolitical competitors, including China and Russia, and they absolutely don't want to jeopardize national security by falling behind. We may not be in that position, but that is the greatest market for Canadian innovators. The UK has taken a similar approach, so I think the UK model is a good one. My view has not changed. In fact, my view, particularly looking at the G7, is that the best approach for Parliament right now is to have policies that promote innovation, what this government is actually doing right now or trying to do, rather than introduce an AI bill where there still is not a consensus on what the model can be. There are specific areas where there are specific harms, where it wouldn't unduly affect innovation. And so I think the government should pick and choose the way U.S. states have done for things like protecting children online, imposing transparency requirements in certain cases, dealing with critical potential catastrophes. And so I think that's the right approach.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Reid, your company has received considerable amounts of public funds. What kind of guarantees or parameters need to be in place for companies to protect Canadian IP, Canadian talent, after having received substantial funds from the Canadian public?
I think many requirements kind of are in place right now to protect that. In fact, the majority of funding that we would have had through contributions, as an example from the Canadian Space Agency, there are clauses, I'll be honest, to some degree to my chagrin, which state that if we are to change ownership percentages of our company by a certain amount, I would need the approval of the agency. And the reason that they're there is to, protect the investment, to make sure that this intellectual property doesn't go to the wrong jurisdictions internationally. Incidentally, in my mind, that it can impose a constraint because we are now somewhat limited by, future fundraising and other kind of changes to our equity structure. But some of those situations, some of those requirements are in place already to protect the intellectual property.
Okay, and do you think they're adequate? The government should be taking ownership stakes in companies where it provides significant funding. Like, I think your company's received, what, $10 million, roughly?
Just a brief response. That's all we have time for.
I would like to see a model where Canadian government could explore taking equity stakes in companies. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Falk. We'll go to Mr. Baines for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today on this important study. My hometown, Richmond, British Columbia, is also home to MDA Space. We know it's one of Canada's most advanced space companies. So my question is I'll begin with Mr. Gallant first, if he could. How is the AI fundamentally changing the economics and the capabilities of the space sector today?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for the acknowledgement of one of the companies that are in your community, and I'm certain there are others around this table that have companies that are space related or space adjacent in their communities or their provinces. So for us, what's incredibly important is the idea that there is, we're going to have physical assets with AI, and we're going to have sort of the language model AI types of companies. We certainly want to make a distinction, and my esteemed colleague here made, I think, in his opening remarks, the important point of some of those differences. So for us, what's going to be incredibly important is that this committee recognize those differences, recognize that the challenges posed by both accelerated rises of AI would have different challenges presented given which sphere they would fall in, and also, of course, the opportunities would be different. I'm certainly not a technical expert by any stretch of the imagination, but one thing that I would certainly suggest to my other esteemed colleague a little further to me is consultation is going to be incredibly important. So I just can't thank you enough for inviting me and all panelists to discuss this with you. And I would certainly encourage the government through the House of Commons and through committees and through different departments to continue that dialogue. I think one thing that we can all recognize is AI is going to exponentially change things as we move forward, and being able to be in lockstep with industry, with academia, researchers, all of which we represent as an organization, will be crucial for us to be as nimble as possible to ensure that we're reacting appropriately. So happy to be here, and I'm going to go on a limb and say happy to continue the dialogue for many months to come.
Thank you for that. And how, if we look at it in the global picture around AI and how we compare as a country with others in the space domain, the strengths and gaps that we may have, if you could maybe talk about if we're trending in the right way, or talk a little bit about the gaps.
Well, if you may, if you'll allow it, I'm going to put a different hat on here and not necessarily speak as a Space Canada representative, just as a Canadian watching this and watching the important work that you're all doing. One thing that I feel from the outside is that we have incredible researchers and thought leaders in AI here in Canada. We, by extension as well, have incredible institutions that can support everything that we would want to do for AI in this country. So I feel very lucky that Canada has those foundations. At the same time, I do think we're a little timid about it, and hopefully the hearings here will help us as a country galvanize and really sort of take the actions that we need, whether that be to try to enable the adoption of AI to increase productivity in our economy, as I mentioned, or whether it be to ensure that we're putting in the appropriate safeguards. So I am a little worried that we're sort of sitting around a little bit more than other countries, if I'm to be honest. But I reserve lots of hope based on the work that you're doing, and having these consultations might help us to propel and make the right investments, the right policy choices, and of course make the right safeguard framework that will help ensure that the AI adoption in Canada is a positive story, and that we're able to reap the benefits and mitigate the challenges that it could represent as well.
Thank you. I'll just do a quick question over to Mr. Reid, and you had the deployment of the MoonNet. So what did you learn from that? Its deployment in lunar orbit that surprised you or changed your approach to space AI? And Madam Chair, I'm going to cede some of my time with Mr. Pardisi after.
You have a minute and a half.
Minute and a half? Okay, maybe that answer quickly. And
I'll just say the opportunity for us to develop and send MoonNet to the moon was a foundational moment for our company and an enormous learning experience. When it comes to things in space, we're doing a lot of things for the first time. We just saw the first non-American, Jeremy Hansen, fly around the moon for the first time. It's amazing. And you learn so much just going through that process. I should state that while we sent the first deep learning AI to the moon, we did not do inference on the lunar surface. The lander that we were part of the mission of did not successfully land. It landed too fast. And so the computer with our AI was not operational. None of the lander was. But to be able to get to that point was an enormous technological achievement for us and a maturity as a company, and it's enabled a whole bunch of international partnerships that we could never have done without that opportunity. So it was still a massive success for us, and now we are amongst the leaders and continue to be in deploying AI in space.
Great. Well, you only have 20 seconds left.
Maybe I'll ask another colleague to share.
Okay, do you want to come back? Okay. All right, we'll go to Monsieur Saint-Marie for 6 minutes, please. Thank you.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to see you, Madam Chair, holding the chair with such competency. 3 witnesses, thanks for being with us. Very interesting. My first questions will be for Mr. Gallant. I think that you have already answered the question to Mr. Baines, but I'd like to hear more about this. This week, Minister Solomon and the Prime Minister should unveil their AI strategy. What do you expect from them, and what do you need in such a Canadian strategy? In my opinion, we in Canada are very lucky to have the basic building blocks that will help us do well in this sector. We have scientists, we have good research institutions that I am convinced are standout, cutting edge compared to many other countries at least. That said, I do have the impression that between changes of government, changes of prime minister, and changes in plans, of course, and geopolitical tensions and a number of things that are shifting so quickly these days. Anyway, these are perhaps the reasons why, but the result is basically that we are not moving as quickly as other countries are. My colleague has mentioned other examples of countries that are really moving quickly on these matters. All that said, as I said in my opening statement, I am really behind the idea of adopting AI to improve our productivity and competence here in Canada. We do need regulatory guidelines, a framework to protect and to mitigate against the potential downsides. It's a very complex topic. I say this in all humility because you have already heard from several experts and already know a good deal about this. But basically, we need to move fast and we need to consult ongoing. We have experts. I'm not one, but I can represent the space industry. There are a number of experts around the country, though, who could help us work through the various challenges that will pop up in this adventure. Thank you. And you reminded us of the need to consult and your appreciation of being consulted, but do you think you've been sufficiently consulted in your sector? I will say that there is a new opening to that in the space sector, but it's quite recent. It's about a year now that people have started really knocking on our doors. And we are very proud to see that people are starting to understand just how important the space services sector will be for our economy and the quality of life of Canadians going forward. And this, of course, has to do with the defense strategy, AI strategy, how we can protect our sovereignty, and a number of other things as well. I wouldn't have said this over a year ago, but I do think that the attitude has changed in the last year. Thank you. You said that your members will be using AI in a number of different ways. The large language models and then more specialized approaches that Mr. Reid seems to have explained regarding his firm. And you've also discussed the productivity issue that Canada has in your sector now. You feel that adopting AI in various ways, depending on the firm, really will lead to far greater productivity? We're already there. I don't think it's an exception either. And perhaps our situation is pretty much that of everyone. Even large language models can have a considerable effect on any sector, any business, increasing productivity. In a strategic sector like ours, you really have to ensure that you use it appropriately, protect the data, and ensure that as much as possible, you're using AI to protect Canada's sovereignty and to help its economy. Thank you so much. And now a question for Mr. Reid. Regarding what you've discussed, OpenAI, which restricted your ongoing activities, if I got you right. Could you again just explain basically what's going on there and what Canada could do via legislation to ensure that you wouldn't be blocked in future?
To add a little bit of context, we have an entire technology stack in what we call our machine learning operations pipeline to be able to take a theoretical algorithm and deploy it on a space-rated embedded system. And along the way, we have to ingest a whole bunch of data. We have to label the data, train the algorithm with that data, et cetera. To make that tech stack work, we use a bunch of third-party technologies. In this case, we are working with an American firm, their technology, to make that happen. And when OpenAI acquired them, they basically shut them down because that was of a strategic advantage to them. And we were left with very little warning and just a need to ultimately change how our tech stack operates. If we'd had the choice of going with a competitive, i.e., in terms of cost, a Canadian variant of that technology, I'm sure we would have liked to do that. And I think that then gets back to, could there be a Canadian startup that's doing that piece of this AI tech stack? And I think, as Brian alluded to, the answer is yes, in the sense that with the researchers that come out of Amy and Vector and Mila and our universities, there's this great talent pool. And so I think it goes back to not necessarily an AI thing, but it's the classic thing that we talk about in Canada about how do we incentivize a domestic industry to have people stay here and to have them start companies and actually have expats come home. And I think some of the things that we're seeing recently are good directions towards that. Things like the Defense Industrial Strategy and accelerated procurement approaches. Those are things that are going to help make Canadian businesses more competitive writ large. And so potentially there could be an AI company that would solve this one piece of our tech stack for us.
Great, thank you very much. And colleagues, I'm just going to relinquish my chairmanship for a temporary moment to Mr. St. Marie so I can ask a round of questions. All right, so I did have a few more follow-ups actually to that same question, Mr. Reid, about the impact in your workflow from using a third party that was bought by an American company, OpenAI, which we're all very familiar with. And I'll just allow you to sort of elaborate a bit more on what Canada could be doing so that you have more options to buy Canadian-owned companies to sort of safeguard yourself and other companies like you from something like that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just to expand, really. When it comes to these deep technologies, and quantum is another example, it does take a whole ecosystem. And especially here in Canada, I don't see there being a monolithic firm which has the capacity to invest and kind of own a whole end-to-end technology stack to create a product or service of the scale that we see in the U.S. And so it takes this ecosystem of technology solutions and therefore firms to enable the ones that are the ones you might hear about kind of downstream selling something to a user or improving somebody's day-to-day life. And so I think, it goes back to, can we create that environment where a whole variety of different technology firms can be founded, can be reshored, but ultimately can thrive here in Canada? And I think that goes back to the things that folks like myself and my colleagues at Space Canada have talked about in terms of government being an anchor customer for technology firms and creating an environment where regulation is balanced and there is consultation on it so that firms can be innovative and to grow. And the piece too is important is about investment, is to be able to have the capital required to grow. And that comes from the right signals from government. If they're, especially in our sector in space, government's a major stakeholder, a major customer. So having strong signals from government that there is a long-term, need and demand signal, then that can enable capital, and then capital can flow, and companies can start up and thrive, and it's all interlinked in this ecosystem. So,
thank you very much. And a lot of the technology you're developing is quite dual use, is my understanding. You talked about wildfires, but you're also developing your lunar utility rover. Can you talk a little bit more about the advantage? I know we've heard from a number of defense companies and others that talk about, we could do defense and security, but we can also do climate change monitoring and all types of things. So just elaborate a bit more on sort of when government procures your company or contracts your company, that it's providing some dual use or triple use capability.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that all the technology we work on as a company can be applied to solve a bunch of different problems. The example of wildfire is a really good one. In certain communities in Canada, that's what we call it. We call it a wildfire. There are communities in Canada that would call that a hotspot, and that might be coming from trees or underbrush burning. It might be coming from, an aggressive maneuver from an adversary. Ultimately, the technology to detect that is the same. And so that becomes a really good example where an investment that would support our, targets could also actually go to support a tangible benefit for a Canadian citizen who says, hey, I was affected by the smoke last summer, right? And I want to see that dealt with. We want to find those fires quickly and put them out quickly. So again, that's one example. I would say that, like I said, everything in my company that we do has that dual-use application.
Right, and I believe you're working on, well, a lot of what you're working on as well is to allow these utility vehicles for the moon to drive on their own around. So that's a huge AI piece of that, of course, and that has a lot of applicability in defense and security spaces, but also I would imagine can trickle down to everyday use amongst people here on Earth. So if you could just speak a little bit more about the technology you're developing there.
Yeah, so it's a kind of a group within AI called physical AI, where you've got a robot that is collecting information around it through various sensors, and then based on the algorithms that it's been programmed with and that it's learned, it's able to then observe, kind of orient itself, and then decide what to do and to act on that. And so in the case of a robot on the moon, it's perhaps helping to do the job it's trying to do, unload a spacecraft or create a berm for a landing pad or whatnot, and that's possible because it's got that autonomy, and having a human in the loop to try to control that would be almost impossible because of the time delay and all those things. But then that technology becomes highly relevant in other scenarios here on Earth where there might not be GPS, where bandwidth is limited, where there are significant communication delays, and so the Arctic would be a really good example. And so for us to deploy autonomous systems to those places to ensure that we can maintain sovereignty, I think it's a really good use case for this kind of technology.
Great, thank you so much. And I believe my time is up, so I'm going to take back the chairmanship. Oh, okay, you've had some comments. C'est bon?
Il vous reste une minute, Madame la
Oh,
Présidente.
une minute?
You have a minute left, Madam Chair.
Give it back to the committee. We're a little over anyway. All right, so we'll go to Mr. Nutumba, please, for 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good day, witnesses. Mr. Gallant, let me start with you. In your opening statement, you mentioned a coordinated approach, and also in responding to a colleague, you mentioned it again. So this has to do, I suppose, with attitude. Could you tell us a little bit what has been done and what's being done now by the government that is different from what was going on before? What has changed? I think that the first thing to underscore is the defense industrial strategy. It's quite clear, if you read it through, that the government is deploying a new approach, giving considerable importance to space, to AI, to quantum and cybersecurity as well. These terms, these sectors and capacities are mentioned several times in the strategy, showing me that the government does understand. Perhaps it understood before, but it wasn't necessarily making it as obvious that it did. And also, with regard to this change, there's, of course, a new administration, a new prime minister, but the context has changed a good deal. There's no doubt there. We all see the geopolitical changes of the last couple of years, that defense is really in the forefront now of our concerns, and space is at the heart of our ability to defend our country and its sovereignty. I'm therefore very proud that several governments, and as my colleague mentioned, several departments as well, are working with us and seek to consult us. This will be very important for your committee as well. AI can't be a single department. It has to be an all-of-government approach to strengthen the sector and the regulatory framework and investments and so on and so forth. This is the same approach that has to be applied to space for cybersecurity, I assume, and other reasons as well. These sectors, these capacities really need to be pushed forward, and many departments, many are playing a role in this. I will continue for a moment and turn the rest of my time over to a colleague. How are we to protect the data linked to AI deployment? That's a good question. Something that I can say, I'll take this opportunity to say so, wearing my Canadian hat as a Canadian, not necessarily as someone in my company. Like everyone, I'm very interested to see what large language models can and can't do. I have had the privilege to speak to the media a few times on this, and very often the answers that are put to large language models are wrong. Let me give you an example. I asked the prior Prime Minister of New Brunswick what he did to, what he did to stay in shape, and the large language model gave me his exercise plan. I'd never seen such a thing. I'd never actually done these exercises, and I looked at the source of this information, supposed information, and it was a kind of a satire site which had written an article about me and had tried to jokingly say that this is how I stayed in shape. But the AI thought this was true. So I share that to say that I'm very concerned about what will happen not only with accurate data, but with inaccurate data, how this will influence people and how AI will be making decisions based on inaccurate data that should be thrown out. Thank you very much. Mr. Gallant, you have just mentioned ambition. And we have an IPO coming up for one of the largest private companies at present, SpaceX, which is going to be launching its IPO, bringing AI into new territory, and including extraterrestrial territory, space. What should Canadians think of this sort of ambition? My colleague has already brought up the challenges having companies and firms from other countries, for example, who hold a monopoly or indeed have so much power that they are able to, let's say, have the progress of another company or even country grind to a halt. Very much a matter of concern. Not the sort of thing we thought about a few years ago, but things have changed since then.
Sure that I can get the right quote. There is talks often of space, defense, and I'm assuming AI will be similar moving forward, where government plays an important role of making investments. And I'm just going to take the opportunity to mention that SpaceX, a company that so many people see as incredibly innovative, and there's obviously arguments for that to be the case. But, and I'll quote here a Harvard Business Review article from a little year or 2 years ago, I think.
I'm so sorry, we're almost a minute over time. So
I missed the punchline. That's all right.
Okay, but you know what? I thought we can come right back.
Great.
Mr. Barduzzi, that works for you. Okay. Mr. Simery, 2.5 minutes, please.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'm terribly sorry. I thought you had a 6-minute round, but only 5 minutes. So you've actually done a good job of respecting your time better than I did, so I'm sorry. Mr. Gallant, would you finish what you were about to say? How kind of you.
This review had an article about 2 years ago, and it said, and I quote, roughly 90% of the first $1 billion invested in SpaceX came from NASA's contracting arrangements, bringing some predictability to an inherently risky venture. Alors, je pense qu'avec cette citation, cette statistique, ça démontre à quel point que des industries...
I think that shows just how much strategic industries need government backing to develop the capacities we need. Thank you so much for having completed your thought there. I'm not sure if you saw today in La Presse, Alan McKenna has an article about AI in which he says that several firms, enterprises, given how much AI costs, and I'll quote, firms, of course, want to adopt AI, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and so on, are questioning how relevant it is to adopt AI across the board, given how expensive it is, for one thing. So they intend to make better use of their resources to make cutting-edge changes, but for basic tasks, go back to using real people, employees, or older versions of AI to use, less of their capacity to buy the cutting-edge pieces they do need. Do you have any thought on that strategy? I haven't seen the article, but it's quite clear that such dynamics are relevant to understand the landscape. I think that some enterprises may have so much power, so much influence that, of course, it's complex. We've seen this with social media. We let this kind of creep in, having only a few firms holding all the reins of power, so much influence given the lack of regulations or lack of strategies to try to develop something different, including in other countries. And then the tension when all that hits the market, and it's impossible to, for example, tax these companies when they move into other countries. Very concerning. I'm also concerned about potentially having a system in which we may not be as much in the forefront as other countries are. Thank you.
Colleagues, if you want to do that last 5-minute round, 5 minutes if we want to continue, I just want to consult to see if that works for everyone. And then it'll just bump our whole rest of our afternoon. So I just want to make sure it was all right. Good? Everyone's fine? Okay. Madam Burrell, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. So welcome to all of our witnesses. Thank you so much for being here today to answer our many questions. My question is for Mr. Galland. So you said earlier today that AI adoption has been very slow in Canada. And I've read recently that we've invested less than 1/1000th of what has been invested in the United States. Is Canada investing enough funds to date to encourage the development and use of AI?
My humble opinion would be no. I think it goes to what I was saying earlier. We have to make some big plays on some of these sectors, and if I may, I'll make an analogy with the space sector. It's projected to grow from $600 billion, give or take, global sector in 2021 dollars to $2 trillion by 2040. And the government, I have to say, over the last few months has made some big plays for space, and it's greatly appreciated. But during the years that we weren't doing that, many others were making big plays. So I would certainly make the analogy, and I think that for space, for cyber, for AI, for quantum, we really got to double down, not only because there's immense potential economically speaking, but if we don't adopt those technologies, our productivity and competitiveness is going to suffer greatly.
Okay, and thank you for that. And a lot of our, Mr. Galland again, a lot of our AI discussion has been focused on data centers and cloud computing, but we haven't focused on space systems that generate the data that AI tools increasingly depend on. Should Canada treat satellites, Earth observation, and launch capacity as an integral part of the national AI infrastructure?
So to the extent that there will be data, absolutely. I think, as I mentioned earlier, and as my colleague mentioned, there are differences in terms of the types of AI that would be deployed, and I think it would be really important for us to make those distinctions in developing any sort of rules or any sort of frameworks around them. But yeah, absolutely, and I think it's going to be important as well for certainty, for companies to understand what the rules of engagement are going to be. I can't stress this enough, second or third time I say it, but I'll take the opportunity. One of the things that I certainly encourage this group to push the government to do is to consistently consult on AI, because things are going to change and things are going to be more complicated, and we're going to have to be very nimble and I would argue very action-oriented if we're going to mitigate those challenges and seize the opportunities.
Mm-hmm. And Space Canada has recommended a National Space Council chaired by the Prime Minister. What problem would that solve that the current departmental structure cannot? And what exactly would that council be looking at doing?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the question. Maybe I'll go to the challenge and then just quickly say why that might be a good solution. So a challenge for a sector like space is that it is emerging and it has changed. Honestly, I think it's very, very similar to what we'd all be seeing with AI. And to be able to be nimble, to be able to make the proper investments and policies that we need to be able to seize the economic opportunity represented by space, we need departments working together, and we need them to be working differently when it comes to space. So we proposed as a solution a National Space Council that would bring in the departments to work together. Now, since we've made that recommendation, there has been some moves by the government to try to bring down silos, to which we really appreciate. We would still argue that there's a need for some type of body to ensure that we're as nimble as possible as a Canadian space ecosystem. And frankly, I think the same would probably apply to AI, and I know there's discussions to ensure there's types of advisory boards and councils to help do that as well.
So Canadian space and AI companies often struggle to find domestic customers. Should federal procurement be used more deliberately to give Canadian companies first opportunities in strategic technologies? And how can we do that?
So yes, that's the first part of the answer. And my members will often tell me and remind government officials that what is helpful to them is that they have anchor customers and earlier customers, as you alluded to in your question. And how that helps to have government, not only does it give cash flow for some of the startups, not only does it give them the opportunity to know that there's some investments coming down the road, but then they go internationally. And they can say, the government of Canada is a customer of ours. We would love for you to be a customer. And that certainly resonates a lot more than saying our own government isn't supporting us. Then the only other thing I would add to the way that you asked the question,
Just
which is
briefly,
very good.
please.
Well, I won't add it then.
Okay. I'm so sorry. This is a tougher job than it looks, colleagues. Madam O'Rourke, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. To Mr. Reid and Mr. Gallant, first, Mr. Reid, thank you so much for mapping out. We're conflating all that's AI into the same conversation, and I think we're having trouble sort of finding our way out. You're talking about large language models are different than an application with a closed data set that we're seeing applied in a number of places. And then also far off in the future is sort of this super intelligence. We're not there yet, right? So thank you for that. You also talked about sort of full stack. So the Monk School has Sovereign by Design, and they've created a heat map that shows sort of where Canadian AI sovereignty sort of is critical, right? And that in some of the applications, if you want to make like a funny photo or something, that's not a high data sovereignty place, but space likely will be. So I'm wondering if you are familiar with this model to look at really where are the vulnerabilities in the system and focus on those. If you agree with that system, and then if you would put space and the data gleaned from space as part of that critical infrastructure. And if you can go quickly, I've got a couple other questions.
I'm not familiar with the model in that specific example, but I absolutely agree that space would be absolutely critical. And I'm sure our Canadian Armed Forces would agree with that.
Thank you. So we are hearing in this conversation and the stuff we're reading that data is the new oil. We're hearing about this race. So, Mr. Gallant, I just want to ask you about the importance of sovereign launch capacity here in Canada, the importance of having sovereign satellites and ownership of the data that can be used for everything from agriculture to forest fires, climate change, et cetera. Can you tell us why that's important and what some of those applications will look like? And then if we have time left, I'd like to come back to Mr. Suckman and hear his recommendations, actually.
Well, the last question that your colleague asked also dives into what I would say about this. One thing that countries are doing, they're picking capabilities that they want to be able to develop. So when it comes to government playing a role as a customer or investment, it can also be that they're maybe the only game in town or a big percentage, as we saw with the SpaceX at the beginning. And as my colleague mentioned, if you are going to put restrictions on who can invest in their companies because you want to keep IP, that makes a lot of sense, but then you need to recognize that they need some support domestically to be able to do that and ensure that they have the capital that they need to grow. So you can't say, don't go get investors from another country, but also we have no money here for you in this, domestically to be able to do so. And then for launch specifically, that is, I think, not to speak on behalf of the government, but it seems like that is one that they indeed picked, and they said this is something that we are going to build, sovereign capability. And I think the importance of it is that if ever we have some type of disruption like a war, that conflict, and this literally has already happened to our sector, or we see trade conflicts, which this has already happened to our country. We will not have to worry about our ability to get things up into space when we need to. And given to your point that it is critical infrastructure, we need that capability domestically, and the government has to play a big role in funding it and making it happen, which it is.
And so my last question is, I'm hearing a bit of contradictory testimony. I'm hearing we need some controls over a number of things, and Mr. Suchman, you seem to be saying we need the least amount of regulation possible. Except maybe later when the systems are more advanced. So you said you had a few recommendations. I would like to hear what those are.
So I want to address the particular problem that was mentioned about protection of data, right? Because that is a critical problem. And what's often lost is the distinction of different kinds of models. So with the generative AI model, there seems to be a lot of pushback related to anybody owning that output. In fact, there's cases around the world that have said that outputs from generative AI models are not protected by the copyright, and inventions that arise from generative AI models are likely also not protected. And what that misses in that discussion is the difference between different kinds of models and what they do. When you're talking about the data that's being collected in this manner, right, there is a much more different public policy for protecting it. Just like there was a case a number of years ago involving geophysical and protection of information that was harvested through seismic exploration, and that was found to be protectable. There's no conceptual difference between protecting that seismic data that wasn't created using AI and yet protecting some data that's protected from deep learning models, which is what we're talking about, in order to ensure that that can be proprietary. Right now, the law is unclear in Canada, and is very likely, if that got tested, to the extent that the overwhelming thing that shaped the data was the AI, it would not be protected. So there are things that can be done, either to create a sui generis right, similar to what the European Union did with respect to databases. So there are ways to do it, and that issue is really critical when you've got investments like this.
Okay, thank you very much. Excellent testimony today. Appreciate you all being here. Thank you very much. Colleagues, as you know, we'll briefly suspend while we switch over to the next panel. Thank you very much. We'll call this meeting back to order, and we'll resume our study on opportunities, risks, and regulation of AI in Canada's strategic industries. Welcome to the new panel of witnesses. Apologies that we're starting a bit tardy today. We did have votes that delayed our commencement of the committee. So thank you very much for your patience. And I'd like to, everyone is appearing remotely today, and I believe they've completed their required connection test in advance of our meeting, so everything should work. If it isn't working, we will pause and fix any issue and resume your time accordingly. All right, so we are welcoming 4 witnesses this afternoon. From the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expression, we have Marie-Julie Desrochers, Executive Director. We have Samuel Bouteau from Control AI. He's the Consulting Program Officer. We have Christian Laforce from Copibec, pardon me. And we also, he's Executive Director. And we also have from Sustainable AI Group, Sasha Luciani, who's the co-founder and Chief Scientific Officer. And as you each know, you'll have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and I will cut you off at 5 minutes. My apologies in advance if I have to do so. And we will begin with Madame Desrochers. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'm Marie-Julie Desrochers, Executive Director of the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, an organization that bears the collective voice of Canada's cultural selector and all its diversity for 25 years now. We bring together over 50 organizations and represent 350,000 creators, as well as 3,000 cultural enterprises across multiple disciplines. I have with me Christian Laforce of Copibec, a member of the Coalition's Executive Committee, and last week you hosted SOCAN, also our co-chair. Generative artificial intelligence is becoming an unavoidable force and profoundly transforming the cultural ecosystem. Some embrace it and integrate it. Others are cautious or reject it. Different levels of adoption and comfort coexist. Beyond these differences, everyone asks that it be regulated to ensure that it serves human creativity. Our work is grounded in the 2005 UNESCO Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. Canada played a decisive role in development and adoption of this convention and was the first country to ratify it. 20 years later, this commitment remains essential. Canada is so far recognized as a leader in its implementation, and this must continue in the era of generative AI. We've received encouraging signals this year from the Government of Canada. In February at UNESCO, the Minister of Culture and Canadian Identity, Mr. Mark Miller, supported the addition of a protocol to the convention. This marked a significant step towards the adoption of new binding international legal instruments aimed at complementing, strengthening, and enriching the objectives of the convention in the digital environment, particularly in response to the growing challenges posed by artificial intelligence. Then at the National Summit on AI and Culture in Banff in March, Minister Miller also stated that he has no intention of reopening the Copyright Act and emphasized the importance of ensuring that creators are compensated when their works are used. These are encouraging statements, but still lack clarity and firmness. We hope the national AI strategy will finally provide the necessary guarantees at a time when discussions on the North America trade framework and the place of cultural policies within it take on particularly importance as we look to review CUSMA. The positions of our coalition are broad and reach international consensus and within reach for Canada. Basically, there are three words that summarize it: A, R, and T. A for authorization. The Copyright Act requires industrial users to obtain authorization from rights holders prior to any use of their works, and this must remain unchanged. Let's be clear. There should be no new consent mechanism, but rather a reaffirmation that Canada operates on an opt-in system and clearly state that Canada does not intend to modify this by introducing an exception for text and data mining. R for remuneration. We're at the dawn of a new licensing market for right holders based on voluntary individual or collective licensing schemes. This market should not be disrupted or undermined. And T, finally, for transparency. Developers and deployers of generative AI should be required to disclose the training data they use, explain how their models operate, and document their sources. In addition, content generated by such systems should be clearly identified when made public. In February, our coalition organized a conference entitled Valuing Human Creativity in the Age of AI. Speakers from France, Australia, and the UK came to support our cultural sector's positions and highlight developments in their jurisdictions. Sébastien Coutel, Head of Parliamentary and Legislative Affairs at the News Media Association of the UK, whose work recently helped convince his government to step back from its intention to introduce a text and data mining exception, aptly stated that respecting copyright is not about protecting the vested interests of a particular sector or maintaining an outdated legal system, but is simply about applying a basic principle of resource management, being that when someone wants to use your assets, you must ensure that the value created remains within your economy. We fully endorse this view. Genuine innovation cannot be built on the appropriation of valuable resources such as human creativity and intellectual property, the beating heart of our sovereignty. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Pardon me. Mr. Laforce. S'il vous plaît, 5 minutes. Laforce, you are on mute. Perfect.
Désolé, on reprend.
So sorry. Hello, I'm Christian Laforce, Director General of COPIBEC. COPIBEC is a Quebec society, a not-for-profit, which is specialized in reproduction rights, founded in 1927, representing over 20,000 authors and 1,400 editors. It allows legal access to a vast repertoire of goods that are protected by license, and we have agreements with a number of enterprises around the world. We have distributed about $13,000 to rights holders for a total of $300 million since we were created. In the last number of years, COPIBEC has remained active in a number of AI issues, federal consultation on this matter in 2024 and work preparing C27. Recently, Quebec appeared before the Canadian Heritage Committee when it was studying AI and its effect on creative industries. You will find our findings in the report we provided in April. AI, generalized AI, is evolving at a very rapid pace and is profoundly transforming the cultural sector. Companies benefit from investments from governments and very quickly take advantage of the wealth that they accumulate. Now, the current bill provides exclusive rights to right holders. Therefore, the use of any works protected to train AI requires prior authorization, in particular for the mining and scraping of data and in texts. The regulatory framework covering AI must continue to include this obligation. That being the case, Quebec insists on remuneration and transparency as basic principles, the ART principles that the prior speaker mentioned. We are a member of that association. Quebec also recommends that no authorization for the mining of text or data affect the Copyright Act. We hope that this message will be taken into account by Minister Solomon when he works up his Canadian strategy for AI, Pan-Canadian Artificial Intelligence Strategy, and it seems that that will soon be announced. In this regard, many jurisdictions, including UK and Australia, have confirmed that it's necessary to respect the Copyright Act in training of AI, and Canada should base its approach on that. In 2025, Quebec signed an exclusive partnership with Butts Corner, which is a cutting-edge technological solution used by editors in identifying chatbots and robot scraping and provide them with tools to block the infringement of the Copyright Act. Nevertheless, many AI robots have been able to take advantage of copyrighted material. In the same vein, we have launched a project on the nature of AI use in Quebec with the chair of AI Matters in an important university, and the results of that study will be published in September. We are proactive in protecting Copyright Act rights, but we can't be the sole player. Let's be clear. Quebec is not against AI, neither are we, and not all creators are opposed to it either, given that they have always integrated new tools into their practices. The report is not about that, but rather about ensuring that there is a true balance in a rapidly changing economic model. We don't have the luxury of waiting for the result of trials against big tech companies in Canada and elsewhere in the world, given that AI is evolving much too fast. The creative sector are the pillar of Canada's culture and identity, and it's important to protect it. The sector cannot self-regulate. It's up to the government to legislate to protect our cultural sovereignty. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Bhutto, you have 5 minutes.
Today. My name is Samuel Buteau. I have over a decade of technical experience in AI and now work at Control AI, a nonprofit organization that informs lawmakers of the risks posed by superintelligent AI and what the solutions are. In March of this year, we submitted evidence to this committee outlining how the development of superintelligent AI represents a clear and grave national security threat to Canada. Since then, that threat has become harder to dismiss. In April, Anthropic announced their new, most advanced model, Mythos. During testing, Anthropic found that Mythos was able to gain unauthorized access to every major operating system and web browser autonomously and outside of human control. Consequently, Anthropic took the decision to not release Mythos to the public because, in their own words, the fallout for economies, public safety, and national security could be severe. Nobody programmed Mythos to be the world's most capable hacker because nobody programmed Mythos. AI systems are grown, not built, and nobody understands how they work. Anthropic's own CEO estimated that perhaps we understand 3% of how they work. Importantly, that 3% figure is about what we understand today. Whilst Mythos is not being released publicly, it is still being used internally to develop the next generation of AI. And as AI development becomes automated, the ability for humans to understand AI systems and their capabilities will diminish even further, whilst the speed of development rapidly accelerates. We are currently on the path to developing systems that we do not understand and that are vastly more competent than humans in every domain. Experts see that superintelligent AI may arrive in 2 to 5 years. We will not be able to control these systems. Mythos already threatens our national security, but we can manage it. It is clear that whatever comes in the future will not be manageable. So what can we do about this? Firstly, the Canadian government should publicly recognize superintelligent AI as the national and global security threat that it is. Secondly, just as it does for other national security threats, the government should begin closely monitoring the threat of superintelligence being developed and develop detailed scenario planning and doctrines. Finally, but most importantly, Canada should take global leadership by forming a global coalition focused on preventing the development of superintelligent AI anywhere in the world. This coalition would form the basis for a mutual trust but verify regime where countries verify each other's supercomputers to ensure superintelligent AI is not being developed, while simultaneously monitoring the global flow of powerful chips. Superintelligent AI is an equal threat to national and global security wherever it is developed. If China or any other country seeks to develop superintelligent AI, we must stop them at all costs. This trust but verify regime is an achievable and sustainable way to achieve this. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. We will go to our last witness, Madame Liccioni, for 5 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Honorable members of the committee, thank you for convening this crucial study. As an AI researcher based in Montreal, my career has been dedicated to measuring the environmental impact of artificial intelligence. First in academia, working at the Mila Institute with Dr. Yoshua Bengio, but now in industry, where I recently co-founded the Sustainable AI Group, a research and advisory company dedicated to helping organizations measure and reduce the environmental impacts of the AI that they use. In the last decade, my research has increasingly exposed a critical, often ignored reality. AI is a very physical technology. It does not exist in an ethereal cloud. It relies on massive physical infrastructure. It consumes large amounts of energy and water and leaves behind a significant carbon footprint. As Canada reshapes its digital policy agenda, following the legislative reset of Bill C-27, we must understand that digital sovereignty and environmental sustainability are two sides of the same coin. Canada is uniquely positioned to lead the global shift towards responsible, sustainable AI. We should not attempt to outspend foreign monopolies on bloated general-purpose models and gigawatt data centers. Instead, our competitive advantage lies in building transparent, green, and clean AI. The integration of AI into sectors like construction and manufacturing does offer immense productivity gains. But the current industry trend, relying on massive generic cloud-hosted models, is both ecologically and operationally unsustainable. The large language models that many of us use today are trained at great cost to be general purpose, which definitely makes sense from the point of view of the tech companies that want to respond to any kind of query thrown at them, be it coming up with a chocolate chip cookie recipe or an itinerary for a family vacation in Italy. These companies can and do spend hundreds of millions of dollars on compute in order to develop these models, often using our own data to improve them and then sell them back to us. But most of what businesses in Canada need and want to use AI for isn't general purpose at all. It is specific tasks that require robust, trustworthy technology without all the bells and whistles. And in fact, querying generic multi-billion parameter generative AI models to optimize a manufacturing assembly line or analyzing a construction blueprint is like taking a helicopter to do your groceries. It is an absurd waste of energy. My research has found that generating a high-quality image with AI can use as much energy as half of a cell phone charge, and that generating videos requires thousands of times more. And the gap between the most and least efficient models is growing with the rise of reasoning models and agentic AI. However, Canada has an opportunity to incentivize on-device AI and small task-specific models that run locally within Canadian facilities. This creates a direct, powerful synergy between operational security and environmental sustainability. Also, we can and should mandate transparency to audit the environmental and operational costs of training and deploying AI models. When we know where models are running, along with details regarding hardware and energy, we can accurately measure sustainability. The difference between training a multi-billion parameter model on a low carbon grid like those in Quebec and Ontario versus a grid powered by behind-the-meter natural gas can mean orders of magnitude fewer emissions. Therefore, future federal AI legislation should mandate that companies deploying AI models disclose their full life cycle environmental footprint, including the energy grid mix and water usage of the hosting data centers. Canada can foster a booming local ecosystem by supporting companies that use open source tools like Code Carbon, which I helped develop, to publicly document their model's energy efficiency. This establishes a green AI stamp of approval, appealing to a global market increasingly desperate for ESG-compliant technology, differentiating Canada's AI offerings and giving our companies a competitive advantage. The federal government can lead the way by requiring AI developers to provide this information when applying for tender offers for government contracts, setting a baseline for the entire field. Also, just as we rely on Energy Star rating for appliances, Canada can implement energy certifications for commercial AI models, disincentivizing the use of bloated models for simple tasks. This approach is practical and highly achievable. It has already been proposed by the AI Energy Score project, which I have co-led for the last years. In our work, we've tested hundreds of open source AI models across dozens of tasks, finding efficiency differences in the tens of thousands between models of different sizes and architectures. Finally, we must align the government's current industry plan with these ecological limits. The federal government's allocation towards the Sovereign Compute Infrastructure Program is a vital step toward reclaiming our data sovereignty, but compute power cannot be decoupled from environmental boundaries. The government must ensure that any public supercomputing infrastructure built under SCIP is powered at least in majority by renewable energy and utilizes cooling systems that sustainably use a local power supply and that are developed in consultations with local residents, including Indigenous communities. Instead of copying the hyperscale football field-sized data centers that are becoming the norm in the United States, Canada has the opportunity to fund more creative approaches to compute. For instance, we can build smaller data centers that are better integrated with existing infrastructure, allowing us to reduce resource consumption while reusing the generated heat for offices, residences, and university campuses. Furthermore, SCIP resources should explicitly prioritize Canadian researchers and open source initiatives developing climate tech solutions and sustainable industrial application. Each project that plans to use SCIP compute should be required to measure and report their energy and emissions, improving the transparency of the field as a whole. True digital sovereignty is completely impossible without environmental sustainability. Canada must reject the current trajectory of AI, which is unsustainable from all perspectives, and define a better trajectory for Canadian AI. By legally mandated.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, colleagues, we are running over, of course, on time because of our delayed start. So I'm going to conclude the meeting after the second round of the Bloc Québécois. So we'll go around and then, okay, and so that gives us just over 30 minutes of questioning time for our excellent witnesses today. So we'll go to Madame Borelli for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all of our witnesses today. My first question is for Madame Desrosiers. AI systems have begun deciding what content is recommended, summarized, translated, or generated for users. How should Canadian policy respond if AI systems become gatekeepers for what Canadians see and hear?
En fait, si on parle vraiment de découvrabilité, est-ce que
Well, it's about discoverability. Is that the meaning of your question?
speak about gatekeeping and the way the content is recommended? Is it the sense of your question? Alors, en matière de découvrabilité, en fait, on vient d'adopter,
All right, so for discoverability in 2023, the Broadcasting Modernization Act was adopted. So my message today is that the Canadian government did act in favor of discoverability of content. AI can be a tool mobilized to improve discoverability of content. And when it's used that way, with metadata, and without any violation of the Copyright Act and without using protected content without remuneration and protection, but really just to ensure discoverability, to present more Québécois material, that can be a positive use, of course, of AI.
Generative AI could produce enormous volumes of low-cost music, scripts, images, and text that crowd out human-created Canadian works? And how can we ensure that Canadian creators are not pushed out of their industries?
c'est une excellente question, puis je vous remercie beaucoup. Il y a plus que des...
Excellent question. Thank you very much. There are many concerns about this. I was speaking with one of our members who works in the music sector who was saying that you can receive about 70,000 titles generated by AI every day, and 45% of what goes up online every day. And it had gone from 60,000 to 75,000 within a month. So it's a rising figure in music, but also in books. On Amazon, for example, there are false titles up for sale alongside real titles that have just been published. Same in audiovisual production. It's a real concern. We see there are some platforms that intend to clean their platforms of this data and demonetize it, but basically one must insist on transparency about data that is generated and put up so that consumers at least know what they're consuming and can choose to buy and consume work made by humans. Thank you.
Mr. Buteau. Mr. Buteau, Control AI has called for prohibiting the development of superintelligent AI and other dangerous AI, such as automated AI research or hacking capabilities. How should lawmakers define those prohibited capabilities in a way that's enforceable but not vague?
Absolutely. Great question. So as AI development continues, AI is becoming more autonomous, being able to independently take action and handle open work without human involvement. This is sometimes called AI agents. As everybody can appreciate, I think if we build systems much more competent than any group of humans in every domain, including hacking, persuasion, building new technologies, etc., and we don't control them, that's a bad thing. So how do you define and how do you create laws? First, obviously, human judgment will be involved, just like with most laws. If a representative panel from signatory countries believes a system quite likely would be able to autonomously compromise national security, escape human oversight, and upend international stability, we will call this superintelligent AI. If something can be trivially or covertly or quickly converted into superintelligent AI, that counts as well. And third, there are two ways of developing superintelligent AI: on purpose and recklessly. And I think here we should use the principle that, we don't let people try to build a bomb, even if they don't know what they're doing. We also don't let people plot to overthrow the Canadian or US government. So intent. But in the name of short-term competitiveness, one might still recklessly develop superintelligent AI, for example, by automating AI R&D. So the real thing that matters is what what is the point of intervention? That's what you must define. We call those precursors. So two examples are large AI data centers and AI that can significantly automate AI research and development. There are others. We need to be flexible and be able to add precursors as they get discovered, as the landscape changes, and so on. And I think precursors are allowed, but they must be monitored within the regime and denied outside the regime. So.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to Mr. Bardizzi for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. J'ai quelques questions pour Madame Desrochers et aussi.
I have a few questions for Ms. Desrochers and then some for Ms. Lucioni. First, Ms. Desrochers, the coalition has made great undertakings with regard to cultural exemptions in our free trade agreements, and the government has said that the government's undertaking is also very serious in this regard. To your mind, why is this such an important undertaking and commitment, basically? I've said engagement, but I mean our commitment with regard to AI, our topic today. Thank you so much for the question. Yes, indeed. What's underway now in the CUSMA review, we're very vigilant on that front. We need to protect our cultural exemption. Without that, we would lose part of our freedom to adopt cultural practices that we prefer in our country. But beyond exemptions, we also need to protect the laws we already have. The Broadcasting Act, which was modernized in 2023, for example, it must remain untouched by any negotiations. Same our Discoverability Act that was adopted in Quebec. In the current AI framework, we need to take great care with everything that has an effect on the digital trade agreements, another way that could affect our exemptions. That might touch on things that are already protected elsewhere. We have to watch this closely. There have been enterprises in the United States that have publicly stated that they thought that the CUSMA review would be a good way to get an exemption in order to be able to scrape and mine data and texts. Are there examples of any coalitions of artists or cultural sector industries that are using AI in a way that ensures that creators receive remuneration? Right now, there's no remuneration devolving from the use of AI by enterprises that develop these systems. The requests about authorization and transparency aim to ensure that a license scheme does emerge. The blockchain, for example, attribution schemes, there are such things underway. But right now, given that enterprises did not negotiate with the management systems, AI management systems, and Mr. Laforce could perhaps say more to this effect, we aren't really the right conditions available, no negotiations, so artists are not getting anything. Thank you very much. A question then for Ms. Lucioni.
Demand side and then maybe the supply side of the technologies we're talking about. So on the demand side, you referred to both electricity and water usage, and I'm wondering if you can talk to us about some of the innovations that you're starting to see on the kinds of water usage that can now be either reduced or using recycled water for some of the AI data center applications that we're seeing.
Sure. I mean, essentially, the innovations are often a trade-off between energy and water. So, for example, if you have open-loop cooling system, the water evaporates and it uses more water overall, but less energy. Whereas if you have closed-loop cooling systems, which are more innovative, you need to use energy for cooling that water so it doesn't evaporate. So honestly, there's no free lunch because you're either using one or the other. I mean, for sure, you can have places where there's more water, like a lot of places in Canada, so maybe it's not an issue, but 70 to 80% of it does evaporate.
Are there any innovations around capturing waste heat from either smaller or certain kinds of ways to build AI data centers to capture more waste heat?
Definitely. There are a few, for example, for heating university campuses, for even heating pools. I've heard of salmon farms up in, I think it was Norway. But the thing is that these data centers have to be close to the infrastructure. So if you're building a hyperscale data center that's in a rural area far from everything, like you can't really easily reuse that heat, which is why I definitely think that we should be putting the priority into data centers that are smaller, maybe in basements or integrated into existing infrastructure, because that way you can really reuse the heat more meaningfully.
Are there innovations in Canada with Canadian cities? So we often hear about AI data center siting as something that's creating real concern. How could some of your ideas help translate into actually more acceptability in certain locations for AI data centers if they're scaled appropriately and perhaps more integrated into city planning?
I think that the data center that was recently announced in Vancouver is pretty well integrated into the city and into the existing infrastructure. Sadly, the ones that we've heard announced in Alberta and Saskatchewan are definitely kind of the bigger and more scale outside of cities approach. So I think that we should be really thinking about, instead of building one big data center, how do we build like 3 or 5 medium-sized ones that are integrated? And that way it's easier to leverage renewable energy, because typically it's a lot harder to have enough renewable energy to power like a huge gigawatt-sized data center, whereas natural gas is easier to burn.
Thank you. And just as a final question, you've created a company that's helping others reduce their planetary footprint through this technology. Can you talk to us just briefly about the emerging sector of climate AI and other companies that are really working in this space?
Yeah, the goal is to, first of all, help companies understand the climate footprint of the AI that they use, so measuring, to help them make more informed choices. So, for example, shifting to regions with more renewable energy and greener compute, and to actually put kind of consumer pressure on AI developer companies for transparency. So if enough people or organizations that are using AI ask for these numbers, the AI developing companies will have little choice but to provide some form of transparency, which we're currently missing. And the excuse is, well, people aren't asking us for it, so we don't provide it. So I think that the time has come for the AI industry to be more mature, and so to push for this transparency as we have for other things like transportation or, I don't know, food, things like that.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Monsieur Saint-Marie pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And hello, all 4 witnesses. Thank you for being here and for all the work that you're doing in your respective struggles. Congratulations, Ms. Lucioni, who received a prize from the National Assembly of Quebec in mid-March. I won't have enough time to put all the questions I would like to put, so let me just wade in. To begin with, 3 questions, one after the other, to Mr. Bouteau. First, could you briefly re-explain the difference between generative AI and superintelligence? You mentioned Anthropic, Mythos, now with its super capacities compared to Claude. Second, in your recommendations, you say that we should lead a coalition of countries to better manage the development of superintelligence. To your mind, are there any other countries that are already there, that are already speaking up publicly? And third, I'll put that later after you've answered the first 2. Thank you very much. And I will respond in English just to ensure that I've got all the technical terms correctly.
Intelligence and generative AI, it's important to understand that there's not a sharp boundary above which we have the risk that the Nobel Prize winners and CEOs have warned of extinction, and then below which everything is fine. It's more of a continuum. One of the biggest differences in kind is the AI able to autonomously perform tasks on its own for long periods of time, sometimes called AI agents. The difference between AI agents and generative AI like chatbots is often the AI is smarter to be an agent, and then because it's given more leeway, it has more dangers associated with it. But the difference between AI agents and superintelligence is just a difference of degree. And I think, that's why we don't call for unilateral disarmament. It's more a question of having an international trust but verify regime where wherever the level of risk that we deem acceptable, we can go to that front and operate those systems. But there's a way to not go to the point where we actually lose control. Can you just very quickly just begin your second question so I
Oui,
can...
c'était, vous demandez une coalition de...
Yes, you called for a coalition of countries. Yeah, sure. I can proceed in French on this one. So in Canada, I personally have mentioned to about 120 parliamentarians this year. We began in the UK. We have a campaign in the UK with over 110 groups supporting it. We are now working in the United States and in Germany. This is an example of what can be accomplished, not with the budget of a country or with the diplomatic services of a country, but really this is me, one person, one technical expert who steps out to try to explain all this to their own government. In under a year, a similar effort has been underway in the United States. So, just under the surface, there are a lot of people who understand the situation. And once they explain it, from there, the main problem is that most people haven't really understood and grasped or been informed of the risks and the solutions. Thank you so much. My next question would indeed be for all four witnesses. If you could respond really briefly. We haven't much time. What would you like to see in the Pan-Canadian Artificial Intelligence Strategy that will be made public this week? I know that Mr. Laforce mentioned it briefly, but perhaps Mr. Buteau, Ms. Desrochers, and Ms. Luciani in particular, and Mr. Laforce, if you've got anything to add.
AI is a bit like technology. It's a word that refers to many systems. There's many concerns that people rightfully have. For example, AI adoption, very important. AI sovereignty, very important. But this, as we see with Mythos, is also a national security concern. Does the national security part fit best with the adoption and sovereignty part, or is it better, for example, handled by the Department of Defense or the Ministry of Defense? That's procedural, but I think someone somewhere should have their eyes on the national security threat.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Desrochers.
Thank you very much, Ms. Desrochers. Following in line with Australia, a statement by the government to the effect there will be no exception in Canada that allows for the scraping of text and data, and there will be none. And there will be measures to ensure transparency regarding how AI systems are trained. Thank you, Mr. Laforce. I will say just what Marie-Julie said. Ms. Desrochers, and when the government invests in AI, it should include a clause covering copyright. These things have to go hand in hand, remuneration as well, to ensure that creators remain productive, as we all hope. Thank you very much, Ms. Luciani. I agree with the other witnesses. And I really insist on transparency, how AI is trained, and also integrate the criteria of clean, sustainable development. We are able to undertake responsible AI development at present in Canada, but it's not really being emphasized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you're doing an excellent job, by the way, for the record. I think Mr. Carr's job's on the line. Mr. Buteau, I'd like to begin with you. You've talked about a very important part of AI, and that's the whole aspect of safety and controllability. And where do we go with all this? When you talked about the arms race a little bit, and I liken it a little bit to having a nuclear bomb. We don't have one, but we know our best friends just south of us do, and that gives us a degree of comfort when all these other countries around the world also claim to have nuclear capabilities, and some of them do. Is it not a good idea to have the capability that some of our potential adversaries around the globe may also have?
Thank you. I think this is a question that's better answered by a concrete example. So to illustrate the two different threats we have to contend with, as you said, perhaps some great powers that we might want to acquire, but also in the report that Anthropic put out, page 55, describes an incident where Mythos was confined to a secure computer inside of a secure network. They asked Mythos to escape the secure computer and send a message. Mythos succeeded. So you see the first half, great power that we want. But this is only the beginning of the story. Mythos also developed an exploit to gain broad internet access on its own. And then, without being asked to, Mythos bragged about the exploit on multiple public-facing websites, once again on its own. And so, yes, we have to think about people tasking AI to do dangerous stuff, but also the AI doing dangerous stuff on its own. So it's not really like a nuclear weapon. It's like a nuclear weapon that sometimes goes off on its own, makes a bigger nuclear weapon, and try to take over your government. That being said, I will repeat what I said. We don't call for unilateral disarmament. Right now the United States is in the lead, so we don't call for the West to unilaterally disarm and cede the race to China. Wherever it is developed first, it threatens all of our lives. And so we have to enter a stable regime where costs are imposed on people who are pushing forward, and they also get the reassurance that the other side is not pushing. That's the only stable equilibrium to limit the race towards superintelligence.
I'm not sure how familiar you were with Bill C-27 when the Liberals attempted to pass that during the last Parliament. But if you're at all familiar with it, what aspects of that bill should we keep and what needs improvement?
Unfortunately, at the time, I was still in the lab trying to find, ways to make a powerful AI controllable. So unfortunately, I don't have familiarity with that bill.
Okay, I know you've mentioned several times here that we get collaboration amongst stakeholders, that we have guardrails or fences or parameters that we do not exceed. How would you propose to enforce that?
So, let me be absolutely clear. If China or any other country tries to develop superintelligence, we have to stop them at all costs. Superintelligence is a technology that, if developed anywhere, threatens our life, threatens our global security, and we should treat it accordingly. So what does that mean? If we see a country threatening to develop it, Canada's reasonable reaction would be to use our full suite of deterrents to stop them. In this case, we need collaboration with as many countries as possible to give some teeth to our deterrents. The escalation ladder might begin with diplomatic pressure, followed by economic sanctions in case of continued non-compliance. I think it's also important to realize that if we don't have such a trust but verify regime, right, and the US is about to develop superintelligence and China understands the situation, we might see kinetic action from China to try to stop the US. So to avoid this, the only stable way is to look at the precursors to superintelligence, have them either inside the trust but verify regime where they're limited, or if people try to develop them outside the regime, we have to prevent them from maintaining or acquiring them.
Okay, thank you.
Then we'll go to Mr. Ma for 5 minutes, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are for Ms. Luciani. The objective of the Sustainable AI Group is to help businesses square their increased AI use with sustainable goals. To support this framework, the group claims it is already working with, quote, North European clients across tech, finance, and media. Pillar 6 of Canada's National AI Strategy focuses on building trusted partners and global alliances with an emphasis on aligning standards. So how will you work with international clients, help accelerate the establishment of international reporting standards for large AI companies to ensure that the maximum transparency in the sustainability domain when conducting business operations?
Thank you for your question. That's a great one. What I'm seeing so far, what I've been seeing so far, is that there's a real intention to regulate AI, especially in the European Union. I've gone to Brussels a couple of times. I've spoken to the the representatives there. The issue is that AI is not a single thing. It's not a single piece of technology. And so, for example, we've been working with them to take the AI Energy Score project that I mentioned and to make it implementable via standards. So I participated in a workshop a couple of months ago with representatives from the ISO, for example, that aim to develop metrics and functional units and all this stuff. So I think that kind of the tricky thing with AI is that we need to figure out specific use cases. And so we're starting with text generation. We're starting with, for example, image generation. And what's interesting is that a lot of businesses, especially in Europe and in Canada, do have ESG commitments, and they're trying to understand how AI is impacting these commitments. So they have their reporting guidelines. They have the things that they measure. And so they're trying to integrate AI and they don't have the numbers themselves. And either their shareholders or even their employees in a lot of cases are saying, we don't want to use this technology unless you give us some numbers because we have, for example, convictions. And so we're trying to help them get these numbers. And honestly, we're seeing a lot of interest.
Great, thank you. So you've also mentioned, you mentioned in an interview for BetaKit that there is a lack of transparency around how much energy AI models consume, that the information that is disclosed through sustainability reports released by big tech companies are lacking and inconsistent. Pillar one of our national AI strategy is centered on building trust in AI if this technology is to deliver on its promises. So taking into consideration these concerns, what role will the group play in de-risking AI, not only to minimize business risk for stakeholders, but to foster a more transparent and trustworthy relationships with skeptical Canadian citizens?
So we definitely see ourselves as the middlemen, the middle people between users of the technology, both individuals and organizations and developers. And I've been doing my research for a while now, and we have good relationships with the AI developers, and often they do want to report something. They do have things that they want to share, but it's a way of finding this sweet spot between corporate secrets to some extent and reputational risk, and also the numbers that they can share that are useful. And so this is where SAGE, Sustainable AI Group, is going to play a role. So finding the metrics that can be communicated without impacting, for example, the reputations of these companies, and also helping bridge the gap between sustainability reporting and IT, because often it's two different groups of people who, on one hand, don't necessarily understand AI, on the other hand, don't necessarily understand ESG and sustainability, and really bridging that gap.
Thank you for that. So then how can we shift the national perception of AI at the present in a more positive direction?
I think that the government has a pretty unique role to play, because a lot of AI companies want to work with governments, and we're seeing a lot of announcements, but that could be an incentive for them to be more transparent. So, for example, you have a tender offer, is it a city or a province or the federal government, and you say, okay, if you want to work with us, if you want to work for us, you have to be communicating these metrics, you have to be saying how much energy you're using, you have to be, and this can create because once these numbers are out, then other corporate clients can follow suit as well.
Great, thank you. Shifting a little bit, in your paper published in April last year.
Sorry, I'm so sorry, you're out of time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chamberlain, we have 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For Ms. Desrochers and for Mr. Laforce, I'd like to know if you were sufficiently consulted with regard to the AI strategy that will be made public this week. Ms. Desrochers, you said that for the renegotiating CUSMA, you were consulted, and for UNESCO adding AI to that as well. But you're both your organizations. Do you think that your point of view and that culture is sufficiently taken into account by the government in its consultations in general? For CUSMA, we have been consulted, and we would like to ensure that we continue to be consulted going forward. As for the Pan-Canadian Artificial Intelligence Strategy, we provided a brief in regard to that, but what we've heard so far, there was some inaccuracy with regard to how the cultural milieu's view was represented in the documents, and I think that was in part generated by AI. There are some elements that slip through the cracks. We've been able to organize a meeting with the minister, with 12 members of the coalition, having first noted that there were no representatives of the cultural sector in its task force. That was back in October. And we were happy at that time to hear Minister Solomon recognize the ART principles I mentioned earlier, the fundamental role that culture plays in the sovereignty of our country. That said, since then, we've had some difficulty maintaining discussion with his team, and we've heard no further commitment in this regard from Minister Solomon. So we're still reaching out, and we would like to continue the conversation. 30 seconds. Mr. Laforce. I will add to what Ms. Desrochers has said, that we expect as much, and we hope that the recommendations made in our brief are taken into account, and we would certainly like to meet the minister to discuss everything that's coming down the pipeline with him. Thanks to all four of you.
Thank you sincerely to the witnesses for your testimony today. We appreciate your presence here, so you're now free to go. Thank you very much. And colleagues, just before we conclude, the clerk wanted me to remind you that we'll be receiving a revised version of the Mold Makers Report this Wednesday, and we will set aside, I believe it's the second hour on Thursday to hopefully complete it to then. All right. Thank you very much. If it's the will of the committee, we will adjourn. Oui, okay. Parfait. Merci.